This is Antic, the Atari 8-bit podcast. I'm Kevin Savitz. George White was the founder of Koala Technologies, the company that made the Koala Pad. Koala Pad was a touch tablet. Versions were available for the Atari 8-bit computers, Commodore 64, Apple II, and the IBM PC. A version for the TRS-80 Color Computer was also available. It was sold as the TRS-80 Touch Pad. This interview took place on May 20th, 2017. I also interviewed Koala Pad inventor David Thornburg, whom we talk about in this interview. David's interview will be published next. My understanding of things is that you were at Xerox PARC, you invented this touch tablet technology, they didn't want it, and then you ran off to start Koala. So I don't know if that's accurate or not, but maybe you can tell me the real story, starting as far back as you need to.
Sure. Yeah, well, I'll be interesting to... I will be interested to hear what David Thornburg has to say about the same story. But there's a fun beginning to it because we both joined Xerox Palo Alto Research Center, I guess about a month from each other. Anyway, after I had been there, and then they brought in this new hire, and we said, what do you do? Or what did you write your doctoral thesis on or something? I forget how that came up, but he explained how he'd done this beautiful work in solid-state physics and simulating molecular dynamics, movements of molecules on a surface. And then he said, just when I was getting ready to publish it, this guy White came along and published another seminal paper covering exactly the same material and eclipsed me. And I said, well, hi, I'm White.
Oh, no.
So, yeah. And anyway, so we got off to a pretty good start. Anyway, I moved in the direction of computer recognition of speech, which was my specialty at that time. And he's a prolific inventor, so he went on and invented a number of things, including the technology that could be a touch tablet. Anyway, we were there at Xerox for almost 7 years together. And then I decided it was time to start a company. And I knew that mice would someday be vital to computing because we were experiencing that at the Xerox Research Center. And so I decided I would make mice. So I formed a company. And I don't think I hadn't chosen Koala. Let's see, I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. I started a speech recognition company first, and then I formed Koala. But anyway, David had stayed a year or two longer at Xerox Research Center. Anyway, so I formed Koala. It was the intention of making mice. And this was probably approaching 1980 by that time. Anyway, I couldn't raise venture capital to make mice because the VCs didn't know what it was or what it would be good for. But they could understand tablets. So they said they would put money in based on our demonstrated ability to make a touch tablet. And at that point, I had recruited Dave to join me and to give us the technology for the touch tablets. So we went ahead and manufactured those and did, raise venture capital, and the company went down that path. And it was interesting how the choice of the name kept giving a bias to what the company did, because my vision was that we would make pointing devices. When I was at the Palo Alto Research Center, it became clear that someday computing would allow people to point at things on screens. And that when they did, then you could use icons and you could do all the wonderful things that we take for granted now. But when we were together in those initial 7 years at Xerox, that was, we could see the future coming because we had the Alto computer. But most people were still stuck in the world of, a line at a time text. And they use typewriters and the analogy, with the computing area. Anyway, you backspace and retype things all the time. So anyway, we we built the tablet, and we lost the vision of making the mice along the way. It was a little bit complicated because there was a guy named Steve Kirsch at MIT that had come up with a patent for a version of a mouse. The one that I was intending to make, he couldn't have patented because SRI had done it, and then we at the Xerox Research Center adopted the technology, what they called the roller bearing a roller ball, a mouse, which was just simply a little ball, and as it rolled around, it touched on two perpendicular little rods, I guess. Rods. Anyway, they would turn, and as they turned, you could put little holes in discs at the end of the rods that would count how much it was turning. So you could basically move the mouse around and point to things on the screens. Anyway, I became disillusioned with the fact that my company was taking a different direction. I took a different direction, interestingly, because when I got significant venture capital, the strings attached were that we hire a seasoned CEO. I was considered to be one of the youth, I guess, and I needed adult supervision. So they, plus I was a scientist, quote unquote, and not a businessman. And having been at the Xerox Research Center, it was clear I was a technologist, and they thought they needed somebody with marketing talent to head the company. So along with the venture money, I took on as CEO, and anyway, the CEO and I didn't have the same vision of where the company could go. So the mouse was never a product, unfortunately, of Koala. Anyway, I realized I was trying to go back and describe how the name came about and the biases that gave to our product line. I liked the name because Atari was fresh in my memory. Atari was, I thought, a great name. Short, started with A, as it turned out, and Atari had been quite a success. Steve Jobs had worked there during the summers, and Steve and I were actually friends. And anyway, because we'd chosen Koala and had this bias toward children, and so we ended up making a children's keyboard, which was somewhat successful. And we veered off away from the business market to make things for the children. The touch tablet itself. A software developer came along and made some beautiful software that you could paint pretty things, given that you could use your finger and move around the surface. And so the software package was, again, catering more for entertainment and for kids than it was for business. Had we persisted in getting mice into the market, we would have been there with mouse. Well, the beginnings of the iconic interface before Lisa came out.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Lisa, that's the precursor of the Mac.
Right.
You know about Lisa?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
So do you regret the name Koala? Do you feel like it took the company in the wrong direction? Should you have called it Cisco Corp or some businessy thing?
No, I still think Koala was an okay name. But I mean, Apple, back when Apple was, we all thought this was a curiosity. Why would we call a computer company Apple? And I figured, well, if you can do well with that name for a computer company, then why not Koala? And
Sure.
and I would still stand by that kind of reasoning. But I don't regret the name per se.
Okay.
I regret the fact that I wasn't more forceful in staying true to my original reason for starting the company, which was to make mice. And it was too bad because making mice became a big deal. Logitech stepped in. They were in the business of making programming languages at the time. And since we didn't capture that market, other companies could come on like Logitech, and they moved smoothly into that.
So it sounds like you and this CEO did not agree on the things, the direction the company should go in.
Well, yeah, we didn't, and I left, sort of prematurely because of that. We didn't actually have conflicts. It's that he he was a better manager than I was, and he managed the board more forcefully than I did, and because of that, he was able to have his vision and his ideas, be the beneficiaries of the money. We raised a lot of venture capital. We raised $16 million because we had a stellar technical team. Because my connections to the Xerox Research Center were at that time considered to be golden, because the scientist and the technology that was coming out of Xerox PARC was beginning to be appreciated. So, and I had a lot of friends that were willing to consult and lend their names to me and to Koala. The trouble was, I felt that me and my connections were being used to raise money, and we were not really. I was determining where the company's going, and I thought this is a little bit dishonest. So I wanted to back out of that, and I didn't do it in the most graceful way. And another thing, now that I'm many years older and know much more about management, I should have had more conversations with my investors and told them exactly why I want to do what I want to do, but that's water under the bridge.
Yeah. I'd like to go back for a minute and like to know what happened to computer recognition of speech. Why was that abandoned?
Well, the first company that I formed when I left the Xerox Research Center was called Oracle, Auricle. It seems to me that the founders of Oracle, RCL, came by and tried to sell us a database package. But anyway, neither here nor there. I actually sold that company for $2 million about a year after we formed it to Siemens. Indirectly to Siemens. I sold a company called Threshold Technologies, which was in the speech recognition business, and they got a $2 million investment from Siemens to acquire me and my partner. My little speech recognition company was, we're struggling and very small. So $2 million sounded like quite a handsome return for a year's effort. So. But again, I left after about 6 months after the acquisition because I can't remember exactly the reasons why, but I wanted to move on and start another company and do a better job of it, I guess. The speech recognition field, as in retrospect, it was just slow to materialize. It took years. One of my best friends during my days at Xerox Research Center was a guy named Jim Baker, and he and his wife formed a company called Dragon, which was eventually, acquired, and they still, nuance.
Sure, they're a big name in
market.
Yeah, dictation and speech recognition.
Yeah, and I think Jim still gets royalties from that. Anyway, neither here nor there. I didn't stay true to that, and Jim did. But it took 20 more years, 30 more years before it was the moneymaker.
Yeah.
So
tell me about the creation of the first predecessor to the Koala Pad when you were at Xerox. I mean, were you directly setting out to create a touchpad, and part two
Well,
of that?
David was.
David was, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And David, it was in David's case, what you recounted was the story there. Namely, Xerox didn't know what to do with it. So they did this with a lot of their technology, that they let the scientists that invented it, that invent the stuff, take it with them if they left. Xerox, was a noble company in that sense. And, again, I use this because I teach entrepreneurship these days in my class to demonstrate the difference between inventing something and then being able to commercialize it, because we invented so much and commercialized so little, or at least benefited so little. But that's actually typical of companies' inability to exploit disruptive technologies. Clayton Christensen wrote, a whole book on disruptive technology and has his own explanation, which is pretty popular, about why companies don't manage to exploit disruptive technologies. But there's actually a more profound reason that I've come to believe there is anyway, that even Clayton Christensen doesn't understand yet. But
And what is it?
it's basically the calcification of rules and regulations that set into all organizations as they become optimized for whatever product line they're delivering. And it happens in government as well as in companies per se. But in Christensen's book, which is fabulous, the Automator's Dilemma book, he recounts stories in the disk drive area, of disk drive companies being huge and successful, and all of a sudden having another generation of disk drives come along, new technology, and they would be driven out of business by this new technology. And they often had the very same technology, the new technology, in their labs, and yet somebody else came along in a different company. And the explanation Christensen's explanation was that companies are locked into what their customers want. He calls it the law of something limited resources. Anyway, what it means is that when you go to ask your senior management for money to do any, start a new product line or to do whatever you want to do, they will look at the existing customers and say, what do the customers want? That's where we're going to put our bets and our money. And if the existing customers are not giving any hints that they would actually prefer to buy a new product, then the existing incumbent companies don't change. And then all of a sudden, when the customers decide they want another product, then the incumbents are left holding the bag, and they don't survive. That's Christensen's explanation. Is the law of I think it's called limited resources. But anyway, my version of that is that it has to do with the management inside companies that companies just can't change quickly. Yeah. Anyway, to try and explain what I'm dancing around the edge of explaining takes a lot of anecdotal information. It's really, the bigger story is there's collective intelligence, which you can demonstrate exists in groups as small as 2 and 3 people. But the collective intelligence flowers in organizations that are young and flat, or maybe places like Google is doing a pretty darn good job of explaining collective intelligence to its members. But most companies are not at all flat, and the communication directions are top down. They're not bidirectional nearly enough. So most companies cannot change because of the senior management. Basically, the feedback they're getting from their customers and their employees leads them down a particular path. And if they were better at managing the potential collective intelligence in the organizations, they could probably do a better job of avoiding disruption, being disrupted, but they never are. So,
yeah. I would like to hear a story or two of life at Koala. What was it like to work there? Was it just tell me about the environment? Tell me a story if you would.
Well, I thought it was kind of nice. We started out in the schoolroom, and that is, there were some schools that were, I think, grade school probably, and they were not used for education any longer. And the county, the city decided that they would lease them to people like me. And so when we were in there, this beautiful space, with high ceilings and lots of light. And anyway, it was on the edge of a large schoolyard. It was, green, filled with green. It was a delight. And that was only good for 10 or 20 people, though. By the time we eventually grew to more than 100 people. And when we got significant venture capital and, new CEO, then we moved down to, it was Great American Parkway. It was down towards San Jose. And kind of more in the heart of what most of the Silicon Valley companies then tended to aggregate down in just North San Jose or the edge of Sunnyvale, near 101, I guess. Anyway, and well, I'm not sure what to say. We didn't. People were hardworking, and we played somewhat, but it wasn't. I don't recall having a distinctive culture per se. We had good people in different departments, good marketing people, and good engineers. We had some brilliant engineers, but we went off to our different areas to do what we did. We were not big on cubicles. I think most of us had our own offices with potentially closed doors, and yeah, I don't remember any special stories beyond that.
Sure. Um, so this might be a question for David. So feel free to. I would like to. You explained to me so eloquently how a mouse works. I'm wondering if you can explain to me how the KoalaPad works and how this one device can basically manage to talk to the Atari, the Commodore, the Apple II. I see that you did a version for the TRS-80 Color Computer under a white label thing. So can you explain that?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, it's actually clever and straightforward. Imagine you've got a sheet of plastic that's got carbon. It's coated with carbon, sort of fused lightly into the plastic, so that it conducts with some resistivity. And along one edge of it, you have a silver, a good conductor along one edge of this plastic. And then you take an identical piece of plastic, another, carbon impregnated piece of plastic, and you rotate it 90 degrees and then put the two surfaces close to each other. And if you press on the two surfaces so they're in contact, the current will flow in from each of these bars along the two perpendicular directions. And the amount of current that ends up flowing through the system, the amount of current you get in the x direction, y direction is, basically generates an xy coordinate. And we just multiplexed it through, as I recall. You sense one of these perpendicular directions briefly, and then you sense the current fly on the other direction, and that gives you the x and y. Yeah, ask David I'll be interested to see how David explains it, but it was basically that, the two conductive surfaces that you press and they come in contact, and the resistance between where they're touching and the silvered edge ends up telling you how far you are from the silvered edge.
Was there experimenting with different materials for accuracy of touch versus price? Did you have to fuss with that or?
Yeah, that was a big deal. The company that made it for us was Rogers, in Arizona. They made a variety of plastics, and they did make became an investor and a supplier both, and we worked with them a lot. There was the question about how you keep the two sheets separated, because they could sag, so they had to coat them with little dots to keep the two sheets from touching until you pressed them down. And that so they did some of their own inventing, to make these two sheets work that way. Um, these were clouded. I mean, you couldn't see through them. We did tinker with the idea of having see-through, because it turns out that airplanes had, maybe they still have, they put some gold in the interior of the plastic on the windows so that they can heat it to keep the frost off, and so that it becomes conductive. And we could have used the same material, I think, and we considered that, but we ended up not doing that because we did other things. We did a light pen, and we did this children's keyboard and other software and whatnot. David was he's a wonderful communicator, and he was in touch with the Sesame Street people and got some of the Sesame Street, one of the creators of Sesame Street, to endorse the children's tablet and to help design it. So.
Yeah, I noticed you had an Atari product called Muppet Learning Keys.
That's it. Yeah, so it was a keyboard with. Yeah.
Hmm. So how long were you there at Koala?
Yeah, I think 5 years. So we formed it in 1980. I think I left around 1985, and David stayed on a bit after I left, and then they were acquired. That is, Koala was acquired by a publicly traded company who liked our name and liked Koala, so Koala survived and became a NASDAQ traded company. But that happened a year or two after I left.
I saw later it was doing video digitizing gadgets and things. Was that still you, or
yeah.
was that them?
Oh yeah, that was definitely that was me. Actually, I had a inventive engineer. I'm glad you reminded me of that, of MacVision. It was a young guy that wanted to tinker, and so it was sort of a skunkworks project. So go and tinker, come back, and he came back and he designed an entire product that if you stuck a video camera, you're able to use his device, and it would digitize the video and pump it into the Mac. So that was the first video capture system for the Mac, I believe. Yeah, that was very clever and very nice.
Nice. Did it sell well?
Not well enough to turn the company's fortunes around, unfortunately. No, it sold. I mean, one of those things that if we'd been leaner and meaner, we could have survived longer, and the market would have grown under our feet, because video digitizing is a big deal, and Apple, was morphing from the market that it was originally in to being more toward desktop publishing and business. So I'm not sure how a business product would have emerged from that, but I'm sure it could have made us some money.
Yeah. So who ended up using the Koala Pad? You said you ended up having to market more towards children. I mean, did it end up being in schools? Was it an educational thing, or did it get picked up in business at all?
It did not get picked up in business at all, and what uses it seemed to be for hobbyists and children, and I don't think it ever became anything like a standard gadget in education institutions. It was just a bit of a curiosity, just like the Wacom or Wacom tablets are. After we got out of the business, then there were companies that survived for years, making tablets. and I don't know who uses those, to be honest. But there wasn't a big market that grew under our feet.
Hmm. What haven't I asked you about those days that I should have?
Oh, there might be something about Xerox Research Center itself, which is another. It's interesting. I mean, that's was. Um, well, just an organization that was run in a way that no other organizations ever get run, I believe. It was attempting to be a bit like Bell Labs, maybe, but
Mm-hmm.
we had complete freedom. Basically, the model was hire bright people and let them do what they were good at, and generally, they found bright people, and some of the bright people wanted to make computer things. I mean, at the time we were doing these various things, the potential personal computers were non-existent. So Xerox knew that we had this notion of the office of the future being paperless, and they knew that computers were going to be a big role in the office. So they acquired a company called Scientific Data Systems and renamed it Xerox Data Systems. And so there was clear that the senior management, would be pleased if we dabbled in areas of computing and the paperless office. But beyond that kind of fuzzy high level bias, they just left it for us. But it was pretty amazing. And Bob Metcalf came there from Harvard, I guess it was. Anyway, invented Ethernet, and Charles Simoni was a Stanford student tinkering with factory programming. Anyway, he used the methodology that he was studying to design what eventually became Microsoft Word. I mean, it was just the text editor that we used for the Alto. And a guy named Gary Starkweather took the equipment apart that we were using in the xerographic machines, invented the laser printer. And Alan Kay was there, being very visible, as he generally is, and promoted the idea of icons on the desktops to forcefully embody the desktop metaphor, which the metaphor being that the desktop should look like an office, and then computing would be intuitive, because if you saw a phone, you were supposed to poke it to place a phone call, or a garbage can, you're supposed to throw stuff in it and throw stuff away. So there was the full benefit of that desktop metaphor has faded a little bit, and you do have file folders today, but they could make better use could be made of icons than is currently in Microsoft Windows anyway. So, and for that matter, I guess with a Mac.
So what do you do today? You said something about you teach business?
I do. I teach entrepreneurship for Carnegie Mellon University, and I enjoy it a lot. And it's been a chance to study success cases of which entrepreneurial operations made it and which ones didn't. And but I've not been limited simply to small organizations. I've looked at bigger companies and economies. So it's been a wonderful opportunity to dive in and learn and study what I wanted to. As long as I could synthesize a story that would help my class learn something about eventually going into business themselves. So, so I've grown enormously in the last 10 years in terms of my understanding of what makes companies tick and be successful.
So do you have a sense of what I was going to ask what the next Koala Pad is, but maybe that's not the right question. What's the next mouse?
I don't know. What I do know is that the platform these days is the mobile phone, and there's the Internet of Things, buzzword, but they're putting enough sensors either in the actual phones or making it easy enough to add sensors externally after the fact that there's going to be a plethora of amazing things, low-cost things that'll basically be able to take advantage of the fact that phones are so cheap and so powerful that the whole world is carrying around this new, little pieces of this huge computing network that it's exciting to imagine, all the stuff that's going to be happening. And to pick one of them, back at the era when this was, the personal computer was starting, when the mouse was visibly different and unique and somewhat exciting, was exciting to me at the time anyway. Today there's sensors everywhere and opportunities to have more sensors, and frankly, well, me right now, the realization that you could take a mobile phone and clap it into a headset and all of a sudden be in a 3D world is going to give us 3D finally for all sorts of things that we wouldn't have if we didn't have mobile phones to make it so inexpensive. So that's pretty neat. I mean, I have never been an advocate for 3D things because people would, when you make 3D movies, they put stuff in your face. It always irritates me to have a firebrand coming my way and I got a duck. But I think there are a lot more interesting things you can do with 3D than Dungeons and Dragons or Worlds of Warfare or something. But the Warcraft. Anyway, so yeah, I can't say which one. The tricorder is pretty neat. The medical diagnosis things are pretty neat.
Cool.
3D is pretty neat. Yeah.
I think this is my last question.
Okay.
If you could send a message to the kids who grew up using Koala Pads, and you can right now because they're listening to this, what would you tell them?
The adults who were there when the Koala Pad was a novelty. That's the question.
That's the question.
What would I say to them?
Yeah, I mean, people listening to this interview, most of them have used Koala Pads and have fond memories and used Micro Illustrator and on their Commodore 64 or Atari 800. And
yeah.
Send them a message.
Well, the message ought to be something that's an extension of what made Apple so successful, which is art and artistic sensitivity and sensibilities. And the reason that's becoming increasingly important is that we're understanding better than ever before that our deepest insights come from our right hemisphere, our subconscious, which thinks in pictures and thinks in metaphors. So given, I believe there's likely to be a revolution in educational systems in the next few years in which they try to address and train the right hemisphere, which we've never done before in schools anyway. And so, having been exposed to drawing through the initial Koala Pad, sort of gives them a potential little bit of a head start in the artistic realm that's going to be much more important in the future.
Great. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, George. I think I have what I need. Thank you for your time today.
All right. Oh, yeah. My pleasure.
Safe
Thank
travels.
you too. All righty. Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.